In this video, I'm going to discuss how to improve your ankle dorsiflexion permanently so you can finally squat deeper and perform pistol squats. We're also going to touch on some of the common ankle dorsiflexion exercises we'll see in the mobility industry and why they don't work the way they're intended to. And lastly, I'm going to show you some of my favorite exercises I've used to not only improve my own squat depth, but the many other clients with ankle mobility restrictions I've given them to. So let's start with the biomechanics behind ankle dorsiflexion. In order for full dorsiflexion to occur, the talus bone that sits between the tibia and the fibula has to glide backwards or posteriorly to allow the shin to move over the foot segment. And the bones of the foot have to flatten out to allow this to happen. So if this midfoot is unable to flatten out and create space, many people will complain of hitting a bony block in the front of the joint when they move into dorsiflexion. And on the flip side, we'll just see the people who immediately collapse into a pronated or flat foot position when they try to dorsiflex. And this isn't a true dorsiflexion at the talocrural joint. They're more so stealing this range of motion at the subtalar joint and midfoot. Now, not all dorsiflexion exercises are created equally. In order for you to understand which exercises are going to be most beneficial to you, I like to group people into two different foot types that will respond best to different exercises. The first is the stiff foot with high arches that has an inability to flatten. And the second is the foot that is stuck in pronation and has an inability to supinate, aka flat feet. Now, high arches and flat feet aren't necessarily a bad thing, and just because that's the shape you adopt at rest doesn't mean you won't have access to the opposite foot shape when moving. But the shape your body wants to naturally default to at rest does tell a story, especially if there's movement limitations and pain present. Okay, so let's first take a look at the classic ankle dorsiflexion with a band posterior glide from Brian Mulligan, an Australian physio, and this was later made popular in the CrossFit scene from people like Kelly Starrett. Now, the idea is to use a bit of assistance to help the talus bone glide back easier to stretch out the ligaments of the posterior ankle joint capsule. While this drill does help improve range of motion for some people, for others it will have literally no efficacy whatsoever, and they'll still experience a blockage in the front. This is because we're not actually addressing what's going on at the foot, which could be blocking the range of motion at the ankle in the first place. Now, oftentimes we'll see this big tendon that pops out in front, and this is the tibialis anterior. Now, the tibialis anterior is actually a supinator of the foot, and if you do have stiff arches, then this can prevent dorsiflexion from occurring because it doesn't allow that natural eversion and pronation to occur. So let's explain this further. We'll also see tibialis raises, made famous by the knees over toe guy. Don't get me wrong, I really do like this exercise for general strengthening and hypertrophy of the shin muscles. But as an exercise to improve dorsiflexion range of motion, I never found these as beneficial as I did these for a long time with very little results. And if you have restrictions in the back of the ankle preventing ankle dorsiflexion from occurring at the joint level, then just doing a bunch of tibialis anterior strengthening is not going to overcome those restrictions. If you experience a block in the front of the ankle, forcefully contracting the shin muscles to dorsiflex the foot may even worsen the symptoms. So let's start with some strategies to work on if you have an overly pronated foot. Now, the first exercise here is a wall-leaning isometric for the peroneals in the most lengthened position. This will also stretch out the lateral capsule of the ankle. So you're going to step out a couple feet away from the wall. The further you go, the harder and more taxing it'll be on that lateral ankle, and you're going to lean your body weight into it. Now from here, you're going to drive your knee forward and aim to hover the heel. Now the contraction here is important. We want to press through the ball of the big toe into the ground. This is going to naturally evert the foot. Now if you're quite limited in ankle inversion, then you're going to want to bring the floor to the foot by elevating the inside of the midfoot on a slant board. So from here, we're driving the knee forward over the pinky toe, and we should feel a very strong stretch in the lateral portion of the ankle. You could see the lateral calf muscles here flickering. These are the peroneals working hard as we're driving the ball of the toe and inside arch into the wedge or into the ground. Hold this isometric for 3 sets of 30 to 60 seconds. This next exercise is actually one of my favorites and was probably one of the most beneficial for unlocking my ankle dorsiflexion. This is the loaded big toe extension with dorsiflexion exercise. Oftentimes people who just dump into pronation when dorsiflexion struggle to feel a stretch in the back of the Achilles. And one way we can actually find that stretch is to extend the toes.
What this does is it lifts the tarsal bones, so when we dorsiflex, we can concentrate that motion at the talocrural joint instead of stealing that range at the subtalar joint and midfoot. And from a muscular perspective, the flexor hallucis longus is one of the deepest plantar flexors that crosses the backside of the talus bone, which can restrict it from gliding posteriorly during dorsiflexion. Lengthening this tissue works extremely well to feed some slack into the joint and decrease some of that anterior blockage. So progressing from half kneeling, we can load these distal plantar flexors to a greater extent in standing, using a wedge with an additional prop to extend the toes. So dorsiflex maximally, then crush the toes down into the foam. From here, allow the heel to hover slightly, while continuing to drive the knee further forward without the heel lifting higher. We should feel a nice stretch in the back of the Achilles and soleus, as well as that arch working really hard, thanks to the contribution of the toe flexor muscles, which we are lengthening under load. You're going to notice a lot of shaking in the ankle at first when you perform this, but once we build these isometrics for 60 seconds plus, then we can load it. And we can do this with a weight held by the side with a little bit of support on the opposite side for stability. Using a wedge works nicely as opposed to heel flat on the ground because it will pre-position the ankle in dorsiflexion and reduce the need to translate the knee forward to get dorsiflexion. This will keep the ankle underneath the trunk so that we can effectively add more load to the ankle progressively. Now, if you have a stiffer arch, this is one of my favorite exercises for getting that foot to relax. I call this the toe flexion lunge. Now, oftentimes the toes will be limited in their ability to flex, and the first metatarsal is unable to lift, which will reduce the space for the midfoot to pronate into. So as we lunge the back knee toward the ground, this prepositions the toes into flexion as we try to extend the knee and lean back into more plantar flexion. As we bend the knee, we encourage the contact pressure of the knuckles, and then keep that contact as we extend the knee to feel a strong stretch in the top of the foot. So we take up the slack in the range and then continue. Over the course of 10 to even 20 reps, we're going to try to extend that knee even more. And lastly, here's an exercise that integrates everything together, known as the soleus slouch. I picked up this exercise from Irish physio Dave O'Sullivan. The soleus slouch gives the soleus, hamstrings, and glutes an opportunity to work together without the quadriceps or low back muscles taking over, while also helping to train good co-contractions around the lower limb. So here are the steps. We want to bring our ribs over the midfoot by driving our knee over the toe, and we want to keep the knee driven forward the entire time as we perform a segmentation of the spine. So I'm essentially keeping my chin tucked the entire time, rounding forward, shifting all of the weight forward over the midfoot. And you're going to feel the back of the ankle and soleus working extremely hard here. We want to keep a long reach and spinal flexion the entire time. On the way up, we want to lead with the low back while keeping a round of the upper back the entire time. Building tension through the midfoot delays this knee extension and allows the hamstrings to work isometrically, allowing the force to transfer through them to the glute so that it can actively extend the hip at the top of the movement rather than the knee snapping back, creating that kind of fake hip extension. So as you can see here, now I'm elevating the toes on a plate, so the heel is now hovering, which will place more load through the back of the ankle and get the toe flexors involved as well. So again, a really great exercise to integrate the entire posterior lower limb to create some length through ankle dorsiflexion, and also a ton of strength and stability in that lower leg as well. Also, if you're someone who tends to get a lot of low back pain when squatting or hinging, this can be a really effective exercise to understand how to manage forces throughout the entire lower limb while keeping the back relaxed the entire time. So for the brave ones out there, try anywhere from 5 to 8 extremely slow reps here, and I promise you those calves are going to be burning. Yes, you can add some weight in the arms, but only if you're comfortable with body weight first. So really great exercise to perform after you've opened up the range with the other drills prior.
So hopefully you tried some of these exercises and noticed some positive changes and probably lit up some muscles you haven't felt before. So feel free to do 1 or 2 of these exercises or all of them in a circuit prior to lower body days or as a standalone session 2 to 3 times a week. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments.